It is a pleasure to be here and see both the different energy from that I have been used to, and I say in the West, because we are constituted in the West, as you know. And second, to envisage the renaissance that such conferences like this represent for the women's movement. As I listen to sessions, I can see the case studies that emerge that support the kind of argument I'm trying to make in this very hypothetical piece of work that I will present today. And the keynote is essentially really contemplating the theme of the conference and perhaps my own dilemmas with the promise and problems and the responsibility that still remains with us as feminists and the women's movement. I promise to not overburden you with too long a keynote, but I hope I keep you gripped enough to stay with me. This year makes just over 4 decades of my direct involvement in both activism and scholarly feminism in the Caribbean. In the region, there's a feeling that we no longer have an active women's movement. Last week I was in Belize. That is a Caribbean country that, for those of you who don't know, which is located in Central America. And I found out that the term gender is now considered so synonymous with the LGBTI movement that the second national gender policy for equity and equality passed in the society since 2013 has not been activated. The government does not want to be connected with the more controversial feminism that offends the religious pundits. Several fairly recent PhD theses for the University of the West Indies, some of them which I have examined, about the patriarchal challenges that women made are introduced with a disclaimer by the students that neither the authors nor the participants subscribe to feminism. And I ask, where has a movement that encouraged so much optimism in the 20th century gone wrong, that it has to be renunciated? What new dialogues do we have to reopen with the constituency of women and men in order to realize the kind of feminist and human futures that we once imagined possible? I know some of us are really not in that group who maybe will renunciate the women's movement of feminism, but there are lots of people out there, so I'm including that group in this dialogue, if you like. Difference will always be with us. It is not going to disappear. Biological and cultural survival depends on difference. People are differentiated by sex, race, class, disability, mental capacity, sexual orientation, culture, dress, cuisine, among many others. The elimination of sexual difference as a prima facie reason for gender discrimination is at the root of the feminist struggle. Both biological and socially constructed gender differences have been exploited to diminish or disempower. Before the 1970s, for example, Rastafari dreadlocks in Jamaica were associated with an unkempt marijuana-smoking masculinity. These men were alienated from typical masculine power bases and viewed as outcasts of society. Today, Rastafarianism is one of the latest New World religions accepted as such and has attracted a significant male and female following globally, both around the religion it prescribes and the offshoot performance culture it has produced. Another example is warranted of the way in which socially constructed gender is denoted and defined. The wearing of the burqa in public by Muslim women in France was banned by the European Court of Human Rights in the interest of everyone living together in 2010. Shami Chakrabarti of the UK Human Rights pressure group Liberty said the ban has nothing to do with gender equality and everything to do with rising racism in Western Europe. In the current global political scenario of bigotry and terror that alienates each of us frighteningly, in a chaos of boundaries and impossible futures. I'm convinced that we need a dynamic, visionary approach to melding partnerships that have broken down because we each hold on to our corner of often misplaced loyalties. Experience acts ontologically for all of us. We behave our race, class, gender through construction, processes that are largely learned in context. What is it about the nature of experience and the ideologies we must absorb in the reshaping of our conscious and unconscious brain that can now move us to accept difference, or, as Jacques Derrida would have this, a sameness that is not identical? To see the world as constituted in difference from birth is one of the more fortunate experiences that can be granted to any individual. I was born in Trinidad, the larger part of the twin island state of Trinidad and Tobago, a very tiny country located in the northern eastern tip of South America, for those of you who haven't looked up the geography yet. The society was at first sparsely populated from the 16th century by Amerindian groups and later changed hands from the Spanish to British and French colonial powers. Tobago, the smaller of the two islands, even had a taste of the Dutch overlords. The landmass was only really settled with larger groups of people during the 18th and early 19th centuries. In the embers of the slave trade from Africa, having ignored or decimated indigenous Amerindian groups, there was an accelerated amalgamation of Europeans from Spain, Britain, France, and Portugal, freed African slaves, Chinese laborers, indentured Indians from India, and as you can see, I am of course the products of one of those, and migrants from Syria and Lebanon, among others. By the mid-19th century, the urban swell included legal and illegal settlers from smaller neighboring Caribbean islands. Trinidad was undoubtedly one of the early melting pots of civilization in the New World, and a very interesting experiment in difference. The constant exposure to difference in a culture in my childhood allowed for an expanded worldview in this small island state and bred a certain degree of tolerance. For instance, my growing up Islamic meant that there is a familiarity with the sound of a muezzin's call, whether this is from a mosque in my hometown or filtering across a landscape in Turkey. I see a likeness in the face of Africans I meet in Africa with friends or colleagues in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. I see in every Indian from India I meet a kinship and family resemblance that has no basis in reality other than genetic lines that have crossed oceans over 170 years ago. It was provident to spend my formative years among this accident of diversity, where Islamic practices rubbed shoulders with Hinduism and Catholicism, and one was exposed to different cuisines, gender systems, masculinities, femininities, even sexualities, all of which were absorbed and tolerated. Trinidad was not a paradise by any means. There was a downside to all of this. Difference also breeds fear of loss of identity and competition for scarce resources on the basis of race or ethnicity. Nonetheless, a more dynamic worldview was shaped despite the provinciality caused by smallness. Among the ideas that were rapidly transmitted and absorbed by us in the 20th century were those of feminism. Feminism had filtered in by the time I was in my late teens as a roughly textured patchwork of global messages and local experiences. While doing research on gender relations among Indians in Trinidad in the early decades of the 20th century, and this was a historical piece of research, I came across a newspaper column by C. Prasad Naipaul. For those of you who know the name, he was the father of the Nobel Prize winner, V.S. Naipaul, and a journalist. In an article entitled Dangerous Feminine Evolution, Bobism and Whatnot, He berated Indian women for dressing in Western clothing and was dismayed at a growing trend for their chosen hairstyles of a Western-style bob. He clearly would not have approved of me. He referenced the Calcutta Review of India, which had a similar allusion that Indian women in India were making caricatures of themselves by choosing to adopt Western styles. Reading about women's struggles in China, it appears that at the very same time in 1927, China began seeing their first feminists. These Chinese women were inspired by the Western American women and began to wear what was previously considered men's clothing to make a statement on their equality with men. There began a shift from the Chinese saying, women have plenty of hair but very few brains, to the saying, short hair is a symbol of an awakened intellect. Excuse me. If a woman was to bob her hair, then she was symbolizing her modernity and independent choice. This groundswell of behavior from Trinidad to India to China that was patterned on Western norms was an interesting mark of challenges by women worldwide. The 20th century signaled an awakening through heroic acts by the suffragists of Britain and the USA, among other events, and demonstrated the latent consciousness of female power. These signals had spread like a virus across the globe from the beginning of the 20th century. By the 1970s, experiences across regions and nations continued to parallel each other. In Woman's Estate, first published in 1971, Juliet Mitchell makes a passing reference to civil rights activist Stokely Carmichael's infamous statement. His tongue-in-cheek statement is revived. His statement actually was, the only position for women in the movement is prone. His tongue-in-cheek statement is revived in Sheila Robothm's Woman's Consciousness, Man's World, as she navigated the socialist movement in Britain and was given the primary role of carrying cups of coffee to her comrades. Reading both of these books, I was struck by the similarities of my first introduction to organized feminism in socialist circles that I then joined in Trinidad, and the deep entries and tactics employed to encourage women in these groups by our boyfriends and partners. The 60s and the 70s was a time of great innocence, despite the ravages of the Vietnamese War, and my generation were optimistic that liberation of all sorts were on the horizon. The emergence of the World Conferences of Women from 1975 to 1995 was in fact an expression of that optimism, bringing many different countries and groups together to hammer out global agreements and policies that states and political regimes were charged with executing. Sheila Robotham was, however, very prescient in 1973 in cautioning patience. And I quote her, "We cannot bypass the long making of a new society simply by inventing a liberated female culture, intact, out of time and space, unaffected by the social relations which exist around us. The movement between conception and action, culture and social revolution is partial, labored, and painfully slow. But it is the only way we can heave ourselves into the future." End of quote. Mirroring many societies elsewhere, militant groups emerged both in Trinidad and in the Caribbean against violence against women, the deplorable conditions of work, and persistent discriminating laws that we had inherited. Despite Caribbean differences of racial composition, varied island geographies and resources, the commonality was a shared post-colonial history that seemed to speak to us in a unified language in the region. Two examples of collaboration across differences have created the basis for long-lasting resilience in our region. The first is a women's movement that was grounded on issues of violence and sexual and reproductive health. In 1985, I was appointed as a rape crisis coordinator in the first of such centers to be set up in the region in Port of Spain. This movement against violence has sustained to the present. By 1986, the Sexual Offences Act, patterned directly on the Canadian Act, was successfully introduced into Trinidad and Tobago and later filtered to other territories as well. In 1990, the Domestic Violence Act, which specifically prohibits violence against women and girls in the home, was passed and later amended to sharpen its teeth, both in Trinidad and elsewhere in the region. Perhaps the first issue that brought the Caribbean together in a joint feminist agenda was the shared problem of violence against women and children. Looking at the issues in India now, especially the brutal rape and subsequent death of Jyoti Singh in 2012, which led to not only regional and global support, but to the making of a moving film, India's Daughter, and the way that this theme of violence unfortunately keeps recurring in each society. It does not go away, it seems. One is left to conclude that connecting these dots and crossing boundaries would be an ideal area for collaborative work across global difference. Here, varied cultural expressions of violence has to be mined to bring together nations on a common ground. It is clear that as around our increasing independence, violence stays with us. And I think what we see now is not just a greater recording of that violence and women stating that violence, but that the voice of liberated females continue to threaten those who are challenged by change. And what one sees and what I think happens is that you have that violence, that the response to that violence, the response to that is more violence in a way. From the 1970s, a feminist industry of activism and scholarship percolated throughout the globe, transforming opinions and shaking belief systems to the core and infected women and some men in most known societies. Feminist standpoint claims that knowledge is socially situated, viewing all women as marginal and sidelined from power itself, and call attention to the individual subject, to consciousness of a position from which one, to the consciousness of the position from which one spoke. Feminist standpoint theory, which I imagine all of us have dealt with and understand, was a powerful epistemological framework for allowing women voice. Some of the ideas yielded marked transformation on how we now think about things that were taken for granted. For instance, that one of those I think, and I hope this exists throughout, the idea that household work is unskilled labor and deserving of the poorest wages. I'm not sure how much that has filtered, but I certainly think we've changed the idea that housework is not work that should be validated and justified and paid wages. Standpoint theory allowed for many voices, but married with the different political solutions proffered and the growing postmodern tendencies in knowledge-making and coupled with intersectionality caused feminism itself to be splintered, each sect or segment articulating their difference from the other and reacting to the real or perceived dominance of white Western feminism. New voices began to emerge as also dominant ones. Black feminists of the United States, intersectional feminists like Patricia Hill Collins and Bell Hooks, proffered a resounding critique of white feminism that was very necessary at the time. But while constructing a collective identity for African American women in the US on the basis of shared cultural roots, its major proponents homogenized the diverse practices and customs in African societies. Were they also speaking for the African sisters in the Caribbean? A question that we still ponder. There was growing fragmentations and discontent despite some real gains. All women did not benefit similarly. New hierarchies emerged. Chasms began to develop, both in knowledge and practices. Divisions between heteronormativity and homosociality, between third world women and first world women, between corporate feminism and peasant-based feminist groups, between ethnic and cultural feminists who defended their right to different expressions of their femininity and struggle. Chandra Mohanty, and I know all of us should know this book, Under Western Eyes, which was written in 1984, was a landmark contribution signaling that while Western feminism itself was not homogeneous, nonetheless, the production of third world women as a singular, monolithic subject in many seminal texts by the 1980s ran the risk of marginalizing or ghettoizing some women. Mohanty's insights, coupled with that of Edward Said's Orientalism, which underscored the patronizing attitude of some cultures to others, demonstrated other boundaries of thought that needed to be scaled. The repertoire of images that sustain difference and continues to exploit otherness is one of them. One example, not earth-shaking, but I want to relate to you, and it is relevant nonetheless, is a marginal position occupied by Indo-Caribbean feminists on the African demographic landscape of the Caribbean. In 1989, I began a doctoral thesis in history entitled Gender Negotiations Among Indians in Trinidad, 1917 to 1947. I had come to realize that I occupied a minority position that was little understood, as it was outside of the constitution of the hegemonic Caribbean female subject, who was likely to be black, independent, and part of a female-headed or female-centered household. Indian women were viewed as passive, violently controlled in the family, suffused in religion, and cowed by the menfolk. I argued against the seeming passivity of the Indo-Caribbean woman, pointing out that within the culture, women had tackled, if not mastered, the art of negotiating with patriarchy to achieve the goals for themselves and their families. And this morning in a panel that I was evaluating, Naima, I forgot her last name, made a reference to Denise Candioti's bargaining with patriarchy, which in fact informed my concept of patriarchy. So I was building on that kind of work to look at the condition of Indian women and see many parallels. Gradually, over the next 3 decades, a discourse fostered by other Indo-Caribbean scholars, writers, and activists emerged. Not all agreeing on a single unitary Indian female subject by any means, but inspired by the cultural and historical differences that had defined the Indo-Caribbean experience. Organized activity of a sort prospered among Indian women. They became trade union leaders in Guyana and Trinidad, members of political parties, group leaders of Islamic and Hindu women's organizations, and many became educated professionals in the society. By 2010, Kamla Persad-Bissessar became the first female Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. In 2015, 2 Indo-Caribbean scholars, Gabriel Hussein, who is now the head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies in Trinidad, and Lisa Uta, who works out of New York, initiated a conference on Indo-Caribbean feminism. And by 2017, the first reader on Indo-Caribbean feminism had been published. The discourse had at last been named after nearly 4 decades. The authors conceptualized Indian women not ontologically, but rather as a strategic and historically specific point of departure for politics that is combined with all Caribbean gender, nation, and regional politics. It is not separate, yet at the same time defined from a point of ethnic difference. One of the messages here that I want to say about the theme, building resistance, dialogue and collaboration, and so is that gains are slow to achieve. They are not overnight. I contemplate today whether the current feminist struggle has lost the battle to global geopolitics and economic exigencies that threaten to drown out revolutionary voices. Has the fragmentation that emerged out of academic feminism and postmodern discourses, contested by sometimes antagonistic activist voice, stifled growth? Gayatri Spivak pondered on the limits of academics in speaking for others, especially the voice of the Western intellectuals in the post-colonial era. I wonder if I'm a Western intellectual, actually. I'm not sure where to place myself. Internet feminism, or a la Donna Haraway, suggests there's a possibility to free oneself totally from any alliances within the virtual world of gender. Is that possible? Celebrity feminism has caught the imagination of new socially networked hyper-technophiles who also see the future in the virtual. In a paper entitled Like Sugar in Coffee, I argued that a consciousness of gender equality had permeated to another generation, so much so that it was no longer necessary for them to fight the same battles. Yet there's a constancy of violations that remain perennial, while new ones surface and resurface each day. Among these are the growing concerns for LGBTI rights and the need for homosexuality, for solving male underachievement in education, and the problems this presents as a backlash to feminism. The disappeared women and men of Latin America who were remembered by the mothers of May were replaced by the girls in Nigeria, whom Boko Haram had abducted to live under strict Sharia law, forced to become cooks, fighters, and sex slaves. And from one paper that was presented, I think on the first day, the missing women of India joined that lot as well. So there's still the emergence of these groups, they never go away. And in Nigeria, young boys are also kidnapped and turned into child soldiers. The goal of equal female representation in politics remains a challenge in most countries, and in Sri Lanka, where we are located today, in a country that boasted the first dynasty of female leadership, the percentage of women in parliament has not risen above 6.5% since independence in 1948. Currently, only 13 out of 225 parliamentary members, or 5.8%, are women. In the seat of all new ideas are the counterpoint, the dissonance, the antithesis, and hopefully the synthesis. If standpoint theory allowed the expression and voice, it also opened up a Pandora's box of admitting difference, establishing boundaries of sameness that excluded others. Despite the early feminist mantras that we all swore by, the personal is political and sisterhood is global, differences between groups have been sharpened and the concept of woman remains problematic. Simone de Beauvoir had argued in 1949 that woman is always other because the male is the seer. Have the gains of the feminist movement since then overcome some of this limited conception of woman, or do we still define woman only in terms of de Beauvoir's woman as other to man? I would like us to consider that. I think we moved ahead. A revisiting of originary narratives within the conditions of today may well be the starting point to envisage new globalized feminist ideologies and messages that serve to unite rather than divide struggles that are really all very similar under the skin. A good example of this is, and this morning I heard, for instance, Tina Escaja's 13 Moons, the video testimonies about menstruation and sexuality, and she asked a question which I thought very insightful. What are the subjects as women that unify us all around? I think these are the questions that we need to ask. Other people's lives must matter to us if we are to establish the common basis of our humanity. For years I had believed, perhaps unwisely, that world history would be a natural progression in betterment, following a process of enlightened human consciousness. Phases of liberation, impasse, retracing steps, and responding to the immediacy of our material and moral times is a path through which there are no shortcuts. I still cling to this hope, however, that progress is possible. But I add to the feminist melting pot of theory and ideas the work of philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. His theorizing of ethics as feminine and his development of maternity as a trope for the ethical. His idea reverberates with earlier feminist thinkers like Nancy Chodoro's mothering. But Levinas's main point is not to position woman as ethical necessarily, because this places another burden on woman anyway, and we don't want that. But to figure out from what sources spring the ethic of our responsibility to the other as human. Mothering remains, for the majority of human society, the symbol of caring and individual responsibility. There are moments and models of collaboration that have sent very inspiring messages to the world of women. Malala Yousafzai, who defended the right of women and girls. Everyone says Malala, so we know why bother with the rest. Who defended the right of women and girls to an education under the Taliban and was shot for her convictions. And despite this, continued her militancy for children's rights. We know of the 2017 Women's March against Donald Trump's sexism, bigotry, misogyny, xenophobia, homophobia, general stupidity, and lack of confidence in his suitability to lead, which took place in different societies in the US, and extended to supportive women, gay activists, and Democrats. This was in London, Paris, South Africa, and many other places. Much of the rapid organizing of this was done through the internet, ushering new modes of mobilization in the 21st century. Another global struggle is that which takes place each year on November 9 by the Coalition for Sexual and Bodily Rights in Muslim societies. On this day, its members and allies celebrate sexual rights as human rights with the One Day, One Struggle international campaign. This campaign was started since 2009 and grows in numbers and countries taking part each year. These heroic acts of refusal to be silenced and global collaborations are important signifiers of how the women's movement has resiliently transformed itself to meet current demands. In rethinking theory and approaches, we need to consider the imaginative ways in which feminism must continue to respond. Debashish Munshi in Feminist Futures argues, as I do, that the feminist project is equally about the reconstruction of knowledge itself. She urges her students to begin to reinterpret the past through a feminist lens, instead of seeing history through narratives of war and conquest and their so-called heroes. We could look at the incredible work done by women and men in resisting oppression and sustaining communities. The blueprints do exist for us to use them. Victories may be a long time in arriving. I assume all of us know the story of Sarah Saatchi Baartman, who was born in 1789 in Eastern Cape, South Africa. I want to end on an emotive note, as it is this passion for change that ultimately commits us to others. Sarah was sold into slavery to a Dutch trader and more than likely tricked or forced into a dubious contract of servant indenture in England through a ship's surgeon, William Dunlop. Sarah's story was a particularly poignant one, as given the debates of racial superiority and inferiority of the time, and I'm speaking about 1789, she represented a prime example of a different and what was viewed as hideous over-sexualized femininity. Endowed with unusually large buttocks and skin coloring, Saatchi was stage named the Hottentot Venus and was made the object of fascination by colonial Europeans. when exhibits of human deformity or freak shows were another way in which differences were exploited. Her half-naked body was displayed in a cage about 1.5 meters high in Piccadilly, London. She died on 29 December 1815, but her exhibition continued. Her brain, skeleton, and sexual organs remained on display in a Paris museum until 1974. Over the years since her incarceration in an alien and unfriendly tomb, her story continued, and she came to epitomize colonial exploitation and racism, the commodification of black people and black women's sexuality in particular. Her anatomy was dissected mercilessly, while her spirit continued restlessly to disturb. In 1998, nearly 2 centuries after Saatchi was first enslaved, Diana Ferris, a South African artist, poet, author, and member of the same poison group as Sarah, was studied in the Netherlands. Moved by this now legendary story of a countrywoman, she was inspired to write the poem, I've Come to Take You Home. And if you can show me how to, is this how you move the, sorry, just move the slide one. Right, just leave it there and I'll tell you what to move next one. Thank you to that. I've come to take you, this is just one verse of that poem. I've come to take you home, where the ancient mountains shout your name. I have made your bed at the foot of the hill. Your blankets are covered in bushu and mint. The proteas stand in yellow and white. I have come to take you home, where I will sing for you have brought me peace. The popularity of this poem, just go one more. The popularity of this poem is widely believed to be responsible for the French government's decision to return the remains of Sarah Baartman to South Africa in 2002. The poem was published into French law, and the photograph I have there is not the spectatorship of Sarah, which I do not want to reproduce, but her grave, which now represents the image of her victory. What this adds up to, and granted it is schematic in the time that I have, and maybe assumes a lot of theoretical and activist knowledge, is my sense that feminism must demonstrate its philosophical underpinnings as the social conscience of human society. It must concern itself with other people's lives, where other refers to the whole gamut. To women, to men, children of all ages, to sexual orientation and homeless migrants, the lot. There are many cliché jokes about feminism, some salutary, some not. Despite the stereotype attached to this one, I do have a warm spot for it. If the world were ruled by women, there would be no wars, just a couple of countries not talking to each other. Perhaps it is time to change even the stereotype. No wars and all women talking to each other. Thank you very much.